We all had a collective feeling like we'd had enough of this kind of shit. It wasn't anything tangible anybody said to anyone else. It was just kind of like everything over the years had come to a head on that one particular night in that one particular place. And it was not an organized demonstration. Everyone in the crowd felt that we were never going to go back. It was like the last straw. It was time to reclaim something that had always been taken from us. All kinds of people, all different reasons, but mostly it was total outrage, anger, sorrow, everything combined, and everything just kind of ran its course. It was the police who were doing most of the destruction. We were really trying to get back in and break free, and we felt that we had freedom at last, or freedom to at least show that we demanded freedom. We weren't going to be walking meekly in the night and letting them shove us around. It's like standing your ground for the first time and in a really strong way, and that's what caught the police by surprise. There was something in the air, freedom, a long time overdue, and we're going to fight for it. It took different forms, but the bottom line was we weren't going to go away, and we didn't. If I told you these words had been spoken by someone in Selma in 1965, or in Newark or Detroit during the long hot summer of 1967, or Ferguson in 2014, or Charlottesville in 2017, or Minneapolis a month ago, you wouldn't be surprised. But you can probably guess, given the date and the sermon title, that these words were spoken not about a race riot. These are the words of Michael Fader, a patron of the Stonewall Inn on this day in 1969. Mr. Fader was a 26-year-old insurance salesman who probably had no idea that his decision to go to the bar that night would make him a witness to a world-changing moment in history. That's how these things seem to work. Oppression depends utterly on the maintenance of a fragile status quo, a series of quiet backroom deals that create an uneasy world order, stacking one deplorable stone on another and building bigger and bigger walls. And then one day, someone in power gets a little too comfortable and bumps the wrong stone, or someone out of power gets a little too uncomfortable and decides to push or pull on a wall. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, if you ask the oppressors, an angry mob fills the streets and everything is on fire. The details are always different, but the pattern is always the same. The people who make up the majority in a given time and place decide that they have the right to make the rules for everyone. They are afraid of people who don't look like them, or don't act like them, or don't fall into line like them. So they build walls that keep those people out, and that makes them feel safe. Some of the stones and the walls that make up this troublesome reality are literal. We can trace this sort of abuse of power back at least 1,000 years and see the example of feudal lords building fortresses and hurling rocks at foreign invaders. The walls served a dual purpose, just as they tended to come in sets of at least two. The external wall served to keep enemies out and to keep peasants in. The internal wall protected the masters from the servants and had the convenient side benefit for them that if the outer wall was breached, the peasants would provide plenty of extra insulation for the lords. Even so, I can't help wondering if the lords actually felt safe there, because every walled enclosure, by its nature, is both a fortress and a prison. In America, the literal stones are tear gas canisters and rubber bullets and statues of historic figures who may or may not deserve to be remembered. The literal walls are the fences around gated communities and estate homes, and are thousands of prisons disproportionately occupied by those who have been systematically deprived of wealth and power for generations. And then there are all the metaphorical stones and walls. The constant barrage of insults, name-calling, and jokes that target people based on their gender, their skin color, their sexual orientation, or any trait that makes them one of those people. The daily microaggressions, the laws and policies that harm LGBT people because of small-minded or ignorant assumptions about the definition of man or woman or marriage or family. The elaborate edifice, constructed over hundreds of years, of laws and policies written with careful intent to harm Black people by discriminating against poor people, and defended in courts on the basis of their colorblindness. The walls, both visible and invisible, that stand between any of those other people and their ability to work where they want to work, live where they want to live, love who they want to love, send their children to good schools, or even just wear clothes or makeup or a hairstyle that expresses their identity. Modern America looks alarmingly like feudalism in many ways. A small number of wealthy people hold power over a far larger number of comparatively poor people. The lords go to considerable effort to prevent the peasants from obtaining education or building wealth or creating effective alliances that could compromise the security of those inner walls. And, as tends to happen in such fragile arrangements, sooner or later, the lords get a little too comfortable, and the peasants get a little too uncomfortable, and out come the pitchforks and torches. Inevitably, anyone with enough money to have a string of pearls when this occurs will be found to be clutching them. Why must these things be violent, they say? Surely a peaceful protest would win more hearts and minds than all this looting and burning. One imagines any number of peasants went to the feudal lord to petition for a redress of their grievances. Perhaps their needs were even satisfied in some small way by the magnanimous and paternalistic lord. Look at all the marvelous victories we won through peaceful protest. There's the first Black this and the first gay that. These are all victories in the struggle, and the beautiful photograph of Dr. King arm in arm with his followers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, or the one of the New York police taking a knee, are the images that endure. Not the ones of the tear gassing and the dog attacks that happened moments after each of those photos was taken. Perhaps one of the most important lessons of Selma and Stonewall that has taken us 51 years to fully appreciate is that it was the police, not the civilians, who responded with violence. And indeed, whenever those people have peaceably assembled and petitioned for a redress of their grievances, as is their constitutional right, they have either been dismissed and ignored, like the pre-Stonewall homophile groups, mocked, shamed, or punished, like Colin Kaepernick, or met with violence by their oppressors. And isn't it interesting how that never seems to happen at rallies of white supremacists, or mobs of heavily armed white people demanding their freedom from a stay-at-home order that was intended to keep them safe from a deadly disease? Isn't it interesting how a Black person with a gun is a killer, but a white person with a gun is a shooter? Isn't it interesting how a white heterosexual rapist is misunderstood, and a congressman who sexually harasses his staff members is protected by an extensive and elaborate system designed to punish his victims? Look it up. But a transgender woman is a pervert, and a gay couple who wishes to adopt a child are pedophiles. Perhaps the most dangerous walls of all are the walls we can't even see. These are the walls that exist around each of us, that have been carefully constructed over time by our own experiences and by the carefully crafted messages that have surrounded us since birth. These are our beliefs, our assumptions, our expectations, and our social conditioning. They lead us to perceive enemies and cast stones in the name of feeling safe. Over the course of our lives, we construct a fortress that becomes a prison. To the people on the other side of these walls, they are as plain as the nose on your face. You say, "Some of my best friends are gay." They hear, "You have no right to call out my homophobia." You say, all lives matter. They hear, I care more about white police officers than I do about black murder victims. You say, hard work leads to success. They hear, I think poor people are lazy. You say, taking down a statue erases history. They hear, property matters more than people. I want to take just a little detour down that particular side road because it's very important right now. What I've been attempting to illustrate up to this point is that Stonewall, like the Haymarket riots in Chicago in 1886, the German Kristallnacht pogroms of 1938, the Battle of the Beanfield at Stonehenge in 1985, Tiananmen Square in 1989, and Minneapolis just last month, happened because oppressed people got fed up and police got violent. The common thread that is critical to notice about civil unrest and police-induced rioting is that what people are fighting over also tends to boil down to this one thing. Which matters more, property or people? What do stones and walls protect anyway? They repel invaders from a physical space that contains physical stuff. The people who build the walls have claimed their right to the stuff within them and will happily extinguish a human life to preserve their sovereignty over that space and that stuff. Wars are fought over real estate and resources. When the wrong people start to gain too much stuff, and the Tulsa massacre of 1921 is a perfect example of this, the power brokers set it on fire and kill anyone who can't run fast enough. No one goes to prison except perhaps the surviving victims, and the message is clear. Property matters more than people. Specifically, the people in power must preserve their own property and deprive you of yours. It is literally better to burn property to the ground than to allow it to remain in the hands of the wrong people. This invisible wall, the attitude that property matters more than people, is easily the most prevalent and the most destructive of all the mental prisons we occupy in 2020. It was the attitude that police took into the Stonewall Inn, where they did $20,000 in property damage for no discernible reason but to punish the owners and patrons for owning that property. It is the attitude that can accept the murder of a black man at the hands of police, but cannot abide seeing an empty precinct office set on fire. It is the attitude that can't bear the thought of removing a Confederate statue or flag, but is completely at peace with erasing entire cultures of people who look different. If we believe property matters more than people, our walls are nothing but a prison, and a stone is all that remains where our hearts used to be. So what do we do about it? The first immediate step to tear down that particular wall is simply to notice that it's there. If you find yourself reacting to images of a statue being torn down, to an overturned car, to a building on fire, ask yourself why it matters. If the destruction of property causes the erasure of history, then why do we remember the Great Library at Alexandria, or the Berlin Wall, or the World Trade Center? People create property, and people destroy it. If we remember the Stonewall Inn riot, not because of the bar, but because of what people did there. The police may have thought that trashing the place would crush a rebellion, but what it really did was ignite a revolution. That revolution has not yet ended, because freedom is not yet won. We are still fighting for the inherent worth and dignity of every person, for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Why? Because the people in power are still convinced that property matters more than people. The best thing we can do to commemorate the Stonewall Inn riot is to stay engaged in the revolution. First, let us always remember that it was a riot. That tearing down the walls of division and oppression may sometimes require an act of violence, because we've tried peaceful protest and we've found out the hard way that it doesn't work. Second, let us remember that walls are meant to separate, that those in power intentionally sow seeds of division between and among those they oppress, hoping we will fight each other and leave them in peace. When we understand that every American underclass has more commonality than difference, we can turn our collective gaze on the people who have rigged the game to keep all of the underclasses down. Third, let us understand that the common crisis we all face is one of public health. Generations of systemic disregard for human well-being has produced a profit-driven, unaffordable healthcare system, stigmatized mental health issues, and utterly failed to control multiple epidemics, including cancer, diabetes, HIV, and of course, COVID-19, that disproportionately kill Black and LGBTQ people. This situation, besides being morally reprehensible, also hamstrings the economy, the altar at which the oppressors worship, the very thing in whose name they claim all their work is done. Sick, fearful, uninsured people will not become more productive, no matter how much you blame or punish them for it. Beating them harder will not improve their morale, and there is a limit to how rich anyone can become solely by making other people poorer. If we pay attention to how these things manifest within the walls of our minds and of our communities, we can call out what we see. We can write letters to the editor and to the congressman. If others see what we see, they might too spread the word, and some may be spurred to greater action. There is an awakening happening right now that looks a lot like the one that happened after Stonewall. The more people learn and know and talk about the stones and the walls, the better our chances of tearing them down once and for all. So mote it be.